Welcome to the East Bay's best podcast, The Capstone Conversation. This is a show that interviews political, government, and community leaders in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties. We look at what is going on in your city, how are we developing things economically, and where are we going from here? I'm your host, Jared Ash. I'm Jared Ash, the host of the Capstone Conversation. Today, we are joined by not one, but two awesome women from the City of Walnut Creek. And we are going to hear about what inspired them to run for city council. What are some things that they want to encourage in other candidates who are considering to run or not to run as you make the decision ahead of next year's elections? And that applies to people throughout the whole East Bay area. That's not just here in Walnut Creek. So hopefully their message will resonate with people throughout. So first thing we will do, Mayor Pro Tem Luella Haskew, do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. As a career, I was a CPA specializing in tax, but I also did family law consulting and other business consulting. And I was inspired to run for a couple of reasons, one of which is I was close to many of the people who were on council, and I just absorbed all of what they could accomplish just by talking to them and watching them work. But also, I believed that we were going into an interesting economic cycle, and maybe somebody who had my experience would be a good addition to the council.
Great. And our next guest is Councilwoman Cindy Darling. Cindy, tell us a little bit about your background and what convinced you to run.
Well, I'm one of the newest members of the council. I was elected in 2020. Before that, I'd served 10 years on the Planning Commission for Walnut Creek, so I'd seen a lot of the issues that were working in the development end of things kind of bubbling up that were going to council. And I was interested in having a bigger voice on those than you just have with Planning Commission. I'm also a small business owner here in the city. And I spent most of my career working on really tough, knotty environmental problems around the Delta and endangered species. And I felt like I developed a lot of skills there in helping people work together and solve problems creatively. And I wanted to take those skills and bring them to the council and help move Walnut Creek in a great direction.
That's great. I appreciate that. Luella, you've been mayor 2 times, including 2020 during the start of the pandemic. Pandemic issues, businesses shutting down, and then lots of looting here in Walnut Creek. What was it like to be mayor during that time?
Can I say that the first round was sweet? I really enjoyed the first time when it wasn't quite so stressful. But I will say about 2020, whenever I've talked to anybody who had been mayor in Walnut Creek, they said it was the singularly worst year to have been assigned the job of mayor. There were so many issues. We had a police shooting that was under scrutiny. We had looting, and I'm not even sure anybody knows to this hour what triggered the big looting that was at Broadway Plaza. It could have just been the gangs that were beginning to form and take over other places. Thought, oh, we forgot about Walnut Creek has some really nice high-end stores to do. And then they all came. I don't think it had anything to do with the political choice. Nevertheless, it was incredibly damaging to the people who were at Broadway Plaza, and it didn't stop there. Other people were involved in it. I make a joke about the fact that when George Floyd had been killed and people were really involved in making protests, a whole group of people showed up at 9:00 at night on a Wednesday and had a riot in our front yard, doing a significant amount of damage to our garage doors, burning flags, scaring the bejeebers out of our neighbors. The police did call us and say, get out of the house. So we were safe, but it was an ugly experience for the neighborhood. Trying to find the best of the worst, we did have to buy a new garage door, and we now have a battery backup. And then I made it onto the news the next day. So yeah, goods, bad, but it was tough. And the fiscal issues were tough. We started out with anticipating a comfortable excess budget. It turned out that when everything had to close up, sales tax went away, and then we had to figure out what to do about that. And we got lucky that we came upon the pop-ups, the restaurant pop-ups, and we tried every way we could to save all the businesses, did away with our now famous parking meters, and let people park. There weren't that many people using the parking meters, and so it was a very difficult time. Nevertheless, a sense of proportion, a great council, a great staff got the city through probably one of the most difficult years the city had to survive.
Yeah, it was interesting. The morning after the looting on May 31st, I went downtown with a bunch of my friends, and that was part of what makes Walnut Creek special, is there was a bunch of people down there with brooms and dustbins and sweeping up the glass and pulling the designer tennis shoes out of the fountain and just doing part of the cleanup. And it was part of what makes Walnut Creek one for all and all for one.
Yeah, that was definitely a challenge. Talk about something as mayor you got to do that was really positive, that you felt made a big difference in the community.
Cindy, you want to start?
Well, I haven't got to be mayor yet. I could tell you things I wanted to do.
That was going to be my next question. But
Yeah, that's okay. I got to meet so many really interesting people, starting from the fact that I got to fly next to Justice Scalia to just meeting everyday people who turns out have amazing stories. And we are so lucky in Walnut Creek that the visitors and the businesses and our citizens are just really wonderful people. And many of them have fascinating stories. You just can't tell by what they are when you walk past them. It's a good idea to stop and ask, how are you? And welcome to Walnut Creek. And by the way, what did you do before you were a Walnut Creeker?
So we touched sort of on an important issue there. By the time this comes out, the council in Walnut Creek will reorganize. You're currently the mayor pro tem, likely to be mayor. Cindy Darnley here, likely to then become mayor pro tem. In about, I think, 35 cities in the East Bay, you have mayors that are rotational, where you have a dozen plus cities that have a directly elected mayor. Talk to us about those rotational cities. How does that process work? Who gets to be mayor? Do you flip a coin, play rocks, paper, scissors? What's the process?
Most cities have a regular rotation based on a number, and in each city it's a little bit different. Our city, we go by when you came on council, and we just kind of stick with that rotation. That's part of how you can tell if the council is functioning well. If you have people starting to form cliques and vote to jump over the regular rotation, that's where you've got a council with the problem. They're not getting along. We on the Walnut Creek Council just stick to our rotation as it's in the handbook, and it's worked out well for us. The big cities are where you tend to see the elected mayors. There's very few of the smaller cities that have the elected mayors. We are part-time people. We work 15, 20, 45, 85 hours a week on council. And we don't have the luxury of having a full-time mayor because, like the mayor of San Francisco, I think that's all London Breed does. And that's not the way it is in Walnut Creek.
Yeah. And for those of you that are elected officials, I apologize for this next question, but it's geared towards everybody else. What does a council member do? Right? Tell the general public, what is it that you do when you're volunteering your time? What do you oversee for the city? What's the impact you have?
Right. So the council are the decision makers, and they set big policy decisions for the city. And the most important thing they do is they set the budget every year. They say, okay, here's where we're going to put the money. Here's where we're not going to put the money. It's a 2-year budget. Yeah. So you can tell she's the CPA and I'm the biologist. We do the budget.
And she has a water term that makes me nuts.
Yeah. And so we are the ones who make the big policy decisions. And then we pass those down to the city staff, and it's their job to implement it. We also represent the city on a lot of other regional bodies, whether it's the Association of Bay Area Governments, the Community Choice Energy Provider, MCE, that supplies power to many of our folks, Contra Costa Transportation Authority. So we represent the city's interests in those bigger, broader groups. And so we kind of set the tone for the city. We set the budget for the city. We represent the city in other areas. And then we rely on our staff to do the day-to-day work of running the city.
Talk particularly also about what's a mayor's role then when you cycle into being mayor within that.
Okay, so the mayor has a bigger job than everybody else. The mayor runs the council meetings, works closely with the city manager to help prioritize the topics that we do, scheduling them and things like that. We also act as the legislative representatives to the state level, although everybody is invited in most cases when we do go up to attend. We also are the connector to the outside world. If there is like I said, when there was a crisis in Walnut Creek, the news showed up at our doorstep or calls me. I have gotten calls from, I didn't even know Dan Ashley had my phone number. I got a call from Dan Ashley. But yeah, you're the public relations manager or presenter for the city.
And what are the challenges of being mayor and how do you expect the next year to look?
Oh, I'm hoping it's rosy, but assuming it's going to be an election year. So I think there are going to be some outside issues.
What are the benefits of being mayor?
Benefits of being mayor is you kind of get to walk around with a I'm mayor kind of attitude. People are nicer to you when there's like a Chamber of Commerce event. The mayor gets a lot more attention than every other council member in the group. So it kind of strokes your ego and it makes you feel really important, which then gets me to the next side of it, which is what happens when you're not mayor. It's kind of a withdrawal. Your mail, you get a lot less mail, you get a lot less questions. You could be in the same room with the people who thought you were the hottest person in the room the prior year, and you're just a council member. And it's really fast in terms of how your appreciation goes down. So it's a little bit of a bump to your ego. But then about 3 weeks into that new world, you think, I don't have to work so hard and I don't have to be sort of on my best game every hour of the day. And so it's also a relief not to be mayor as well.
So part of this episode is to inspire some candidates or help educate them. What would make you an effective council person? What do you think has helped you succeed in that role?
I think to be effective on city council, you need to be able to listen. You have to listen to staff as they lay out the issue. You have to listen to your fellow council members because each one of us brings a different perspective and a different background. You have to listen to the people who come talk to us. You have to listen to, we're at the farmer's market every Sunday morning. You need to listen to people to really understand an issue from a variety of perspectives. And then you need to be able to take those different perspectives. And after you ask, so I think I hear you say, you ask that about 100 times, and then you kind of find the way where you can meld all the different perspectives together into something that will work for the city and its citizens.
And you have to keep an open mind. And it seems like that should be easy. Sometimes, like everybody else, they hear an issue, I hear an issue, and I'm like, oh, well, this is just right or wrong. Well, that's the wrong thing to do because as time goes on, as your information broadens your mind, you find out it usually is a lot more complex than it would be if you were just an ordinary citizen reading a line in a newspaper. And so you have to keep an open mind. And the other thing that if you're a talkative person is hard to do is you have to keep your mouth shut when people are asking you about how you feel, because that just means you've prejudged. And I it is so hard because people want to know what you have, what you're going to do. And frequently, or in an optimal world, I don't know what I'm going to do until the actual vote happens.
That's great feedback. And I was just in Oakland earlier this week talking to a member of council there. And I represent a number of business improvement districts. These are special businesses that come together to tax themselves or join a membership group, a downtown association, to get extra benefits. And the council person was railing against the business improvement district. She thought they were robbing from the business owners, that they were duplicating efforts by the city. And it was like, do you understand how they are formed? That they are formed by a vote of those businesses to tax themselves in a group for additional benefits. And she thought it was to talk about just the prejudgment that she made of what it was before she actually understood what it is and how it was formed and what they were doing was an interesting perspective to hear, because she was not open to learning about what they actually did and what did businesses care about.
And you have to be willing to listen, and you have to be intellectually curious about why people come to it with different perspectives. Because if the world were easy, we wouldn't need city councils. We'd just be able to, but the world is not always easy.
So you talked a bunch about staff, how you guys set the policy and then staff's job is to do the day-to-day and execute it. Talk about what is the council relationship to staff. Some people say, well, I defer to staff on that to make that decision, but council sets the decisions. Talk just about that relationship, how it works, how you all work together to improve it.
Cindy said it well. Council is a decision maker at policy most of the time. There are exceptions when council is called upon to make decisions that are more judicial and more formalized, particularly in land issues and other kinds of things like that. But basically, we make the general policy. We choose to reflect what we understand are the priorities for our community, and we set the priorities that give the staff direction on how to approach things. We have 6 now. I have them, and I have them printed out that I review them all the time. And some of them are semi-permanent, because you can do things better. But for example, we are working hard. Sustainability and ecology is really important for us. And we're getting close to doing what the city can do in terms of setting standards, in terms of letting people know might be something that we can let sit for a while in the background and go focus more on being a welcoming, more diverse community and how to make that comfortable for all the people that are here. So it's setting those policies and giving the staff guidance on those things. When the staff has an item that they can't quite decide, so there is good with this and there is good with that, which do we choose, this or that? They will come to the council and say, please give us some guidance for this. Our communication, in theory, are 2 employees for the council. We hire the we hire the city manager, and we hire the city attorney. And those are our 2 employees, and everybody else is under the jurisdiction of either the city manager or the city attorney. So the direct lines of relationship essentially stop at the 2 people that we have control of. The next, we watch what they do, and we hope that they keep the staff happy and employed and working hard for the city. And we report when they are reported to us problems that develop. But that's really technically our staff relationship.
What I'm going to give a real case study of something that a friend had texted me about this week. And what's the process? The Little League Association wants to expand a batting cage at a particular park, and they're willing to pay for it. And they've approached staff, and they kind of got, in their words, I was not part of these conversations. They got a sort of a cold shoulder or hood off, like, yeah, you can't necessarily expand it, but you could take more feet to do it. And they're like, well, that was like a non-answer. And they're like, well, do I go show up at a council meeting? Do I need to lobby the council to do this? What's the best process for that organization, that group of citizens to engage? Is it council? Is it staff? What's a decision process there?
Most of those kind of decisions typically are down at the staff level. So it always helps to spend time at the staff level. I know people who have different interests with the open space or different sports or different this, and generally starting with staff is good. If you have worked with staff and you're not feeling like they can give enough priority to your issue, that's when you come to the council. You can come either in public comment, you could write a letter to the council, and the council can look at it and see whether or not we have to weigh and balance all the different things that if you had everything that everybody wants Walnut Creek to do, you'd have a list that goes from here to the top of Mount Diablo. So we have to go through and help our staff winnow it down. So bring the issue to us if you haven't been able to work it out with staff. And we'll look at it and say, okay, how does this fit with our 5 priorities? How does it fit with our 2-year budget cycle? See, I got this 2-year budget cycle. Can we do it? Is it something that if we have to do this, we're at a point coming out of COVID, our staff had, I think it was a 14% vacancy rate. We really had a lot of vacancies. And so there was a couple of things that we really wanted to do. And the city manager had to tell us, well, the only way you can do that is if you tell us that we are not doing something else. And so we'll have to weigh and balance the issue that you bring forward, whether or not it's going to fit within the priorities and the budget. And if there's something that else has to be dropped to get there, we have to deal with those decisions.
And like most governments, we have rules and precedents. And when somebody presents a new idea to a staff person, it's hard not to say we've never done it before. I have to run it through my superior, and I just can't give you an answer like that. So sometimes it's just coming before city council, and that's why we have public comment on items not on the agenda. The supervisor, the person who's in charge of that division, will hear the question, and maybe that will be able to supply a better answer, a more in-depth answer, because sometimes people ask for something that aren't good ideas, or they will be able to kind of say to the employee, the first line of defense, we can lighten our load here and you can accept and we can work it out. So I agree with Councilmember Darling that a great way to bring those things, if you don't get attention, is to come and talk to us in public comment.
I think that's great. And you alluded to this too, is particularly with our parks or the open space, everybody has an idea, right? Some people want more lacrosse fields. Some people want AstroTurf. Some people want grass. Some people want more softball fields. Others want more soccer. Pickleball is a big
Pickleball,
right? And just the balance of deciding between what is best for the overall community and not one issue definitely is a big part of the process, right? It can't just be one-sided.
And pickleball is a good example of how an issue can work through, because the conflict at the Red Gear courts between the neighbors and the noise of pickleball and the pickleball players and their enjoyment of the sport, it started bubbling up in public comment. And the staff went out and did a bunch of mediation. They looked at different solutions. They worked the issue through. Meanwhile, it kept mumbling and back up to us. So we understood pickleball was something that we had to deal with. And so finally, staff had worked through all the different options to relocate the courts. And they brought that decision to council and said, here's a couple different places we could move pickleball from Red Gear to someplace. And that's where we stepped in. We let the staff deal with the day in, day out, how to manage the courts, what hours to put on the existing courts, how to work with the neighbors to change the parking, and a number of ways that we could reduce that conflict in the meantime while we're looking at potential relocation for the courts.
And we point out that pickleball is a national problem almost everywhere. The pickleball players and the people that live around it are head on.
But it just really shows you what, if somebody's looking at running for city council, or if you're asking, what does a city council person do? Pickleball, you're like, pickleball, really? But it is very important to people on both sides of that issue, right? The noise volume is.
Yes. When I was on planning commission, it would be a large family daycare going into a neighborhood. We need daycare. We absolutely need daycare. If it's a daycare right next to your house, you're going to have a different set of issues. And so the council is constantly weighing and balancing impact in a very small area for people most involved. But we also have to keep in the back of our mind, we have tens of thousands of people here who are looking for daycare, who like to play pickleball, who want to hike in the open space. And how do we balance their needs with people that are more directly impacted by those actions?
Let's talk about the fact that we live in a pretty flexible state, and the state is becoming a bigger and bigger influence on what councils can and can't do, particularly in land issues. But that's not the only place where the state can just take the city power away completely. And so it's constantly adjusting to many outside impacts as well.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What influence can the city council have on state legislation, and what are some priorities the state is setting that they're mandating for the city? I guess two big questions. You can tackle them however you guys want.
Well, City Darling's the planning commissioner, so.
Yeah, the big issue right now is the state is struggling with the fact that we're not producing enough housing. And Walnut Creek has a long history of finding ways to provide for housing opportunities across a variety of price points. But the state is getting more and more prescriptive, both in how you have to plan for housing. They are restricting the city's ability to put conditions on new housing. In some cases, they have made things that used to be discretionary. The city could decide to do it or not. Now it's made it such that the city has to allow it. And that is challenging as a city, because I think we've always done a good job of making decisions. And all of a sudden we have things that we can no longer weigh in on because the state has said, you can no longer say no on this kind of project. And that's a big challenge. It's the issue of local control versus state control. But it's also the issue of within cities, there are, I wouldn't call them bad actors, but there are highly growth resistant cities. And those are the poster children that the state is pointing out. Like, you guys haven't approved any housing in 10 years. What gives?
Sure. Let's get local and talk about Walnut Creek for a minute. It's been about a year since the people of Walnut Creek have voted in Measure O. Talk to us. It's an additional sales tax to provide benefits for the city. Is it working? And what are we doing with the money? What are the priorities?
Start, Cindy, and then you can fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing we did to promise the community is to find an oversight group so that they look at what we've done to make sure that we live up to our promises of what we said we were going to do when we started the Measure O process. Interestingly enough, when I first ran in 2012 or 11, I ran on a half-cent sales tax increase, and I got the more votes than I ever did since then. I think there were a group of people who knew that we weren't quite, we needed a little extra oomph in our spending. We've done some additions at the police department. We've made some spending for attracting more people downtown. We're doing things, a lot of things in and around it. But the biggest project is the one that Cindy Darling is working on. And so I'm going to let her take over.
One of the reasons I ran for council is it's important for a community. My kids loved growing up in Walnut Creek. They swam, they played Little League, they played this, they played that, they did this art class. And a lot of the facilities that they were accessing were built back in the 50s and 60s. And we all know things that were built in the 50s and 60s are now starting to fall apart. And we need to pay it forward to the next generation. And that was a big driver on Measure O. The Clark Swim Center in Heather Farm is one bad accident away from its pumps not ever running again. So we are working on a new community center and a new aquatic center to carry on the traditions in Walnut Creek. And that was one of the bigger drivers of Measure O. We are in the planning phase right now, and we have a lot of active, robust public input coming into the process. We have a survey out. You can go to the city councils with the city's website and take a survey on what you want out of that community center, what you want out of the aquatics facility. And we're going to be working to get it so it's up and operational by 2027. And it's going to be cool.
Yeah.
And there's some concern over the money from Measure O coming up on the ballot. I don't want to take up too much time going into every detail on it, but can you talk about what is coming up in 2024 and what impact that might have on Measure O as well as a number of other regional measures?
There are two things to be addressed by the population. The first one is, how many votes do we need to get permission to have an additional sales tax? If we go out for a specific purpose right now, you need 2/3 of a vote of a community, and it's incredibly difficult to get that. If you go out for a general measure, you only need to get 50% plus one vote. There is a measure being brought forth by a business council that wants to remove so much freedom with what we local people can do with taxes. And so they want to make every vote a 63rd vote. And the thing that is most concerning to us because of our position is they can claw back a vote that happened in 2022 and say, you have to run it again and get the 2/3 vote. So we're nervous about the business one. And we're also thinking it's 10% of people will vote no on anything that has money to do with money. And that's, in order to get 65%, you've got to work really hard. And so a lot of cities don't have the capacity to get important things done because they can't get out there and get this full measure of voters to pay attention.
And I'm trying to pull up the numbers. Measure O was passed with
almost 2/3.
65%, but fell about 100 votes short out of 35,000 of crossing that 2/3.
Yeah.
So if somebody repeals it, just missed that mark, right? And to make it retroactive after you've been collecting the money is an interesting court case in the making.
Yes. And I think it's already in court prior to it going on the ballot because this retroactivity, it's like, wait a second, you can't change the rules. We worked hard. We passed 65% of the people of Walnut Creek agreed with the council and wanted to invest in our community. Shouldn't they have the right to do that? We are a majority rules world. Do we need to make everything 2/3?
Yeah. So I want to move past that to another local issue, but it affects a lot of communities. Walnut Creek is a retail hub for the region. People come in from parts of Oakland, from Richmond, from Brentwood to do their shopping in Walnut Creek. But we've had a lot of organized retail theft. We talked a little bit about 2000 here. Let's not talk about what's happened because we know what's happened, but it's an ongoing problem. What are we doing in Walnut Creek to reduce it from happening in the future and to keep the residents safe?
One of the first things we did during COVID, when we had the initial problems, after it was the Nordstrom smash and grab, we allocated 5 extra positions paid for out of our COVID relief money to Walnut Creek PD to help increase the police presence downtown. With Measure O funds this year, we not only continued those 5, because that COVID funding was short-term funding. So now we've moved in and backfill with Measure O funding to keep those 5 positions going. So a strong police presence downtown is an important part of crime prevention. For example, the recent smash and grab at Louis Vuitton, the officers were there in under a minute because there's already somebody there. And they basically really interrupted in the middle of the smash and grab. The other thing we did is add a analytical crime prevention specialist to Walnut Creek PD so that they could better understand. And you can see the benefits of those kinds of things with the recent arrest at Lululemon. They had formed good connections throughout the community. And so when people show up with $3,000 to $5,000 worth of Lululemons that they are returning to the store, it was instantly recognized as a problem. And they came in and managed to arrest the people that were allegedly fencing the stolen Lululemon. And I think 2 other people in the car were also arrested. So getting more analytical about what the smash and grab and increasing the presence downtown. And we do have the bollards up on Broadway Plaza on either end of the street. Our staff worked really hard behind the scenes to figure out how they could get people to circulate past Lifetime and past the restaurants at one end of it. And we're going to keep that closed through the holidays and then take another look at it at the end of the holidays. And that's the basic physically, no, you may no longer drive cars through the windows of stores along that part of the street.
And police, the fire department. But yeah, there's no decision, as we said earlier, is a black and white decision. The other thing that the police department is doing is they're working with other police departments. And there is I think, countywide gang thing. They're looking at the dark web. They're monitoring all the social media to find out what the gangs are doing. And it is a significant gang. I read in the paper not too long ago that they got to one of the distribution centers where all the thefts were taken so that they could distribute it out and sell it on the web. You got to be really careful. They make money, and you got to be really careful when you're looking at what you're buying because it could be stolen property. If it's too cheap, it's either stolen or fake.
Well, and when we talk about organized retail theft, and the reason why it's organized is they have distribution centers. Like, I just want to emphasize that for people. This is not somebody coming in and swiping some one item. This is planned hits, targeted, well thought out crimes with a network of people to make it profitable for them, both on the web or returning items to the store or whatnot.
Yeah, and that's one of the keys to attacking this. When we were seeing the Rolex watch thefts, they figured out where those Rolex watches were going. And that's one of the ways they tackled that. It wasn't just who's stealing them. It's what are they doing with them after they steal them that helps find the solution to this problem.
And the chief made it very clear that they also need to rely on the citizenry. If you see something that's going awry and makes you nervous, please make sure that you report it to the police. The best eyes on the streets are the people who are there and seeing things happen. So it requires a teamwork of almost everybody to be effective in terms of preventing and or stopping and catching these bad acts.
Yes, if the old expression at the airport, if you see something, say something. So let's come back to the original topic. What are some vital thoughts that you want to share with people who might be considering to run or starting to run a campaign for the first time? Words of wisdom, inspiration, whichever direction you want to take that.
I think we've seen some real challenges in our democracy. And I think what you have at the local level is the elected offices that most directly impact people's lives. And part of the way we keep our democracy strong is we care about those things at the local level and we hold people accountable. We look closely at what people are saying when they're running and we make an informed vote. That's the undercarriage for all of democracy. And democracy is something that is a bit challenged these days, and we have an obligation to double it down and support.
So looking at it from where I was when I first decided to run, I had been around City Hall. I'd been a volunteer at Diablo Regional Arts. I knew people. I knew what the city was doing. I had a pretty broad understanding about this wasn't just a finance job. It wasn't just this. It is a broad, you can't tell what's going to come. Could be arguments over how many chickens somebody could have in their backyard, or it could be whether a multi-million-dollar building goes a certain place. There's no way you can be totally prepared for everything. It's hard work to run. There's walking, there's coming up with money to pay for it, even the cheapest of campaigns. And I used to treasure them. That's another reason I got into politics, is people keep asking me if I'd be their treasurer. They're hard to know how to finance. They're hard to know how to put together a strong campaign. We're still learning how to do it in social media, and that's a whole different skill that we don't have. So it's hard work to run, and it convinces you that if I've done this hard work, I deserve to give it back. And then you be patient with yourself for the first couple of years. If you do get elected, it's like drinking water from an ocean. It just all comes at you at once, and you have to adjust. And the reason I ran the second time was because I figured I needed to give back to the city my learning time so that I felt better and I wasn't shortchanging what I promised the citizens to do. So maybe the next question is, what do I look for? What do I hope are the skills of the person that runs for city council? First of all, like I said, like Cindy Darling said, it's the ability to listen. It's the ability to not layer your opinion on everything that you hear. It's the ability to learn quickly and to adapt. It's the ability to admit when you don't know and ask for help so that you get the necessary background training. And it doubly helps to have a good sense of humor, because there are just times when if you only focus on what the job is, you're going to lose all your joie de vivre. And so it should be a person who has a good sense of proportion too. Cindy, I bet you got something to add.
Well, I think you hit on it. It's the ability to listen, the ability to come at it with an open mind, the ability to recognize. Sometimes when you hear people running for an office like this, they say, I am going to do this. But you're one of 5. And if you can't get 3 people to agree, you're not going to get your way. So you have to learn how to work with the other council members to craft solutions that work across everybody's interest. And those are the most effective council members. We have a relatively high functioning council in Walnut Creek, but you look around at other cities and it's not always the case. There are places where people don't agree and it's hard to get the 3 votes, and sniping at each other in social media and things like that. You have to be able to look at an issue, understand it, and then look for the solution that works for at least 3 of your council.
I would also add to that is both of you, as you talked about your experience that benefited you both on council, but as well as your intros, you're both very involved in the city and your neighborhood and your communities beforehand, whether it was back when your kids were in school, you were in leadership positions, volunteering at the schools or in their sports. You were volunteering beforehand. And so I would really encourage people who are looking at running, get involved before you're looking at running. Know your community, build relationships. That will help you succeed both in the campaign and in the office to maximize those relationships.
Yeah, the best experience I had preparing me for city council was the 6 or 7 years I was a soccer referee in youth soccer. There were times it didn't make any difference what I did. Nobody agreed with it. So, yeah.
Well, and I love the optimism and enthusiasm that some candidates bring to the table.
Yeah.
But I remember one time I was listening to a candidate, and it was somebody that I really respected, but they did not have very much experience with the city government. And they're like, oh, and we should bring together everybody that works on homelessness. We should have like a task force with it. I'm like, oh, we should have the Walnut Creek Homeless Task Force, where the task force includes the homeless services, the city, the county, the faith community. Yeah, that's been running for a while. They didn't even know what they didn't know. And know what you don't know if you're going to.
Be open-minded to learn. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good takeaway from that. So I really appreciate the two of you being here today. By the time this airs, we should have a rotation. So it is Mayor Pro Tem Luella Haskew, who will likely be the mayor at the time this airs, and Councilwoman Cindy Darling, who will be likely, based on that order, Mayor Pro Tem as we head into the 2024 calendar year. So I appreciate them both being here and their time today, and hopefully everybody in our audience continue to learn this. Please hit subscribe and follow up and get notices about every episode here on the Capstone Conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please hit subscribe today so you get the weekly updates of when we release the next episode. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Capstone Government Affairs and Economic Development, a firm where I serve as managing partner. For more information, check us out at www.capstonegov.com and follow us on LinkedIn by typing in Capstone Government. Check out the show notes, and for a full transcript, visit our website, www.capstonegov.com, and follow us on LinkedIn by typing in Capstone Government, or you can find me, your host, Jared Ash.